Hello again, everybody, and welcome back. We're going to cover the chapter called Egypt today in the book The Life of Jehoshua, the Prophet of Nazareth by Franz Hartmann. Man, after having vainly sought for the light of the truth in externals and found nothing but darkness, at last discovers that the land of the sunrise exists within his own soul. Hail thee, O Egypt, thou sanctuary of ancient mysteries, thou land of magic and wonders. When the truth was driven away from its birthplace in the east by the king of all evils, the love of self, it found a refuge with thee. Thy indestructible books hold the records of ancient wisdom, and sectarian bigotry has in vain sought to destroy them. With thee they will rest safely until selfishness dies and men wake up to a consciousness of their freedom. Then will the truth return to them, and they may re-enter the holy land of knowledge. In vain, the powers of darkness have attempted to silence the voice of the truth that speaks through thy stony lips. Sectarian vandals have broken thy tablets and plastered up thy hieroglyphics, but thy stones cry out and proclaim the gospel of wisdom. Men have carried away the monuments, and they have become messengers of light from the east to west. No more is thy ancient wisdom taught in subterranean caves to the initiated. Thy secrets have been profaned by the profane. Thy sacred pearls have been thrown before the swine of superstition and to the dogs of blind skepticism. But the swine and dogs turned away from the pearls and devoured only the dirt with which the treasures were covered. Men have robbed thy temples of precious gold, but the gold which they found turned to ashes in the hands of the selfish, because they did not know its true value. They went to the fountain of truth to drink of its waters, but their cups were not purified. They communicated to the water their own impurities, and it became a poison to them, causing villainous leprosy, which they communicated to others. They penetrated to the ark that contained the mystery, but they had no key to unlock it, so they carried away the ark and exhibited it in the west, but the mystery remained in Egypt. To thee, O Egypt, the true Redeemer was known, not as a man-made deity or as a figure in history, but as the Spirit of truth, consisting all that is immortal in man. Let me say that again. Constituting all that is immortal in man. Thy knowledge was too grand to be grasped by the pygmies that invaded thy soil, desecrated thy temples, profaned thy sanctuaries, travestied the truths which were taught and made of a sacred myth that teaches an eternal truth, an historical falsehood. Who can enter an Egyptian temple or even look at one of these ancient monuments without feeling a sensation of awe and solemnity, which few Christian cathedrals with their puppets, mannequins, and tinsel will ever produce? How far more grand and sublime than our modern misconceptions must have been a religion that expressed itself in such gigantic forms. Who but an animal can behold these pyramids, the symbols of immensity, whose bases rest upon the earth and whose points reach up to the heaven, without feeling the oppression of matter and the desire of the spirit of freedom? Who can behold these monuments of a forgotten past without sensing the presence of that consciousness which fills all space, the Spirit of God still floating over the waters, without limits, indivisible, all in all, present everywhere and pervading every atom? Is there any soul in so-called inanimate things? And if not, What causes these stones to speak to our inner consciousness with a voice much louder than that of the occupant of a pulpit? Is it perhaps that the truth itself is speaking to us through these stones, while the pulpit orator merely repeats what he has learned, and is therefore merely an echo of the opinions of fallible men? Have stars souls, or are they merely dead aggregations of matter? And if they are without souls, what is the force that keeps their atoms together and guides their revolutions in space? Why is supreme wisdom, a wisdom beyond the conception of man, everywhere manifest in nature, if in nature no consciousness exists? If nature is an unconscious thing, how can wisdom exist without consciousness and intelligence? Is nature a product of life, or life a product of nature? And must there not be a consciousness of some kind wherever is life? Is it not reasonable to suppose that what we call motion is a manifestation of life, and what we call matter is endowed by the universal spirit with a certain amount of life, and that the life of different forms differs in its manifestation merely according to the organization of the matter composing the forms? If this is true, then there is no inorganic matter of any kind to be found in the forms of nature, but stones and rocks must have organization of their own, and each planet its own peculiar life, differing from the life of the stars in the treasury vault of heaven. If this view is seen to be correct, then will the apparently dead universe with its unconscious motion and its causeless mechanical laws be transformed into a thing of life, pervaded by invisible but living and conscious powers, guided by one eternal, unchangeable law originating in divine wisdom. Then will those dead globes of matter floating in space and obeying mechanical laws for some unexplainable reason be changed into a living family of children of the universal God, who are all doing the will of their Father, because it is their Father's will that endows them with life. But if the suns and stars and the so-called inanimate things have life, then they must have some kind of consciousness and sensation, even if they are not self-conscious and have no knowledge of individual separate life. They may be subject to loves and hates, to desires and passions, to attractions and repulsions. Then it would seem that the ancient astrologers were right after all in attributing certain virtues and vices to the different planets and stars, and in believing in a certain kind of interchange between their radiations. There is no reason why stars should not be in possession of intelligence, even if they are not conscious that they are existing as separate beings. Is it not possible that even a high degree of consciousness and intelligence may exist in an organism that is not aware of the fact of being an entity different from other entities in the universe? Let us here ask the question whether a high state of consciousness and intelligence is not possible even in man without any consciousness of self. Are not men most happy when they forget their own selves? Do they not, when they become interested in reading a book or in witnessing a theatrical performance, listening to music, etc., forget the time being that they are entities existing separately from others? Do men not even drink the intoxicating cup for the purpose of forgetting self, and are they not miserable in proportion as they think of themselves? Men do not cease to live or to think, to be intelligent, to know, to love, and to will when they forget their own self. But they then cease to have selfish thoughts, a self-will, and a selfish imagination. If we could be free forever from the sensation of self, we would not cease to be conscious and intelligent and happy, but we would cease to be limited by that self, and we would all do the will of the universal God and partake of his thoughts. Perhaps a glance at the ancient books of wisdom may throw some light upon this matter. If we open the Bible, the first verse of the first chapter of Genesis teaches us a great truth taught by the Egyptian hierophants. Bereshit bara Elohim eth Hashemen and eth Eoris. This is to say, the first cause produced the powers which constitute heaven and earth. The term heaven refers to all states of consciousness, earth to all forms of matter. If the first cause produced all beings, even those that have life, it must be itself the source of all life. If it produced the powers which constitute wisdom, it must be wisdom itself. If the great cause is spirit, and what else can we call it, then by producing all things it endowed them with its own spirit, and all things must have a spiritual basis, which enables them to exist. All things must have souls, and it is their souls which cause their material constituents to act upon each other, and to produce the divine harmony which we observe throughout nature. Where do the material constituents of a being end? Are they all enclosed within the shell of its visible form, or may there not be invisible radiations of sensitive matter, not having entered the solid form, but nevertheless belonging to its organization? Does not the corona of the sun belong to its substance as much as the fiery globe constituting his inner body? Does not the power which a magnet exercises on a distance belong to the magnet? May we not look upon a star as being an organized body whose periphery exists as far as its influence reaches, while its visible globe is merely the visible kernel of the great invisible mass? And may not the same reasoning be applied to all living beings, even to man? If this is true, then we are all, like the stars, living within the sphere of each other, and all beings are substantially one, separated from each other merely by the illusion of form. It is very difficult for man, whose perceptions are subjected to the limitation imposed by form, to conceive of the invisible and formless. But he will never be able to obtain the key to understanding of the divine mysteries of nature until he realizes the unity of the all, and knows that the so-called invisible and unknowable realm is the real and substantial world, while the great phantasmagoria of corporeal forms is merely an illusion, produced by aggregations of matter and constructed by souls of things, the carpenters in the workshop of nature, the stepfathers of the newly begotten Son of divine wisdom. Let me just interject here. And remember in the dry erase board lessons that I did, the very first thing that I talked about was nature, and how Saturn is an anagram for nature, according to Marsilio Ficino, who was one of the great Renaissance philosophers. It's just, I just wanted to note that. It's just interesting. It is known that the ancient Egyptians were well versed in astronomy, and recent discoveries made in regard to the construction of the Great Pyramid go to show that they knew, in many respects, more about this science than the moderns suspect. But to them, the suns and planets were representing invisible realities. To them, the visible corporeal stars were merely external manifestations of invisible internal powers. When the present civilization beholds nothing else but dead material bodies Obeying the mechanical law of gravitation, whose cause it cannot explain, the ancient Egyptians beheld a universe filled with life, following the universal law of order and harmony, whose cause is the will of the eternal Creator, who produced these forms within the substance of his own mind. Remember the dry erase board lecture when we talked about God pouring his mind out for us. That's just one way that it can be described. That's generally kind of the Hebrews called that area in the sky macroprosophis, and suspected that was where the Godhead was, and that the thoughts of God were pouring out. Now, you can also describe that in a number of other ways. You can describe it as Osiris and Isis engaging in the act of sexual union, which produces matter. You can describe it like that, or you can describe it in the way of macroprosophis pouring his mind out. You could describe it in the way that the Hindus would describe it. In that case, the Milky Way galaxy forms kind of like what appears to be a spine, and then we could go, and then the elements, which are coming from the pineal gland and going down the spine in the cerebrospinal fluids. When they reach the bottom, they must be raised again. We can describe it like that. There's many ways to describe it, but it's all describing the same truth. Okay, let's continue. The visible terrestrial sun was to them a representation of the invisible spiritual central sun of divine wisdom, named the sun god Osiris, in parentheses, Christ. Unknowable to external sensation, but manifesting itself as Horus, in parentheses, Jesus, in the hearts of mankind, becoming regenerated within the souls of the pure by the power of our eternal mother, Isis, the ever immaculate virgin, the goddess of nature. God, to them, was not a limited being, but the eternal cause of all manifestations of power within the realm of matter and in the kingdom of spirit, containing within himself everything that exists, and yet in consciousness being superior to all beings. While all things are living and changing in him, he remains always the same, tranquil in his eternal glory and undisturbed by any external influence. He does not descend to us, but the gifts which we receive from him differ according to the positions we occupy in regard to him. Let those who desire to know whether these doctrines are true look within their own minds, for man is an image of his Creator. There they will find a continually changing region of thoughts. Subjective forms of all kinds throng that interior realm, ever changing and without rest. But if they penetrate deeper, even within the realm of the spirit within, they will find a tranquil place and a principle whose state of consciousness is not affected by the changes going on in the mind, and yet these changes are produced by that principle, sending its rays into the world of ideas existing within the mind. The divine spirit in man does not descend to the sphere of man's intellectual understanding, but man may rise up to it in his thoughts. Let me just interject there. Remember the painting of Michelangelo. God's always got his hand extended, but man has to put in the effort to connect that chain. Without man sincerely putting in effort, then he will never become what he truly can become. But it takes a sincere and genuine effort to want to know God. Knock and ye shall receive, as they say. Now I lost my spot, so let's see where we're at here. Let's see. Sending its rays into the world of ideas within the mind, the divine spirit in man does not descend to the sphere of man's intellectual understanding, but man may rise up to it in his thoughts. There are periodical changes taking place in the mind of man. similar to the astronomical changes in the universe. There are ebbs and tides of thought, as there are ebbs and tides of the ocean. There are times when man involuntarily approaches nearer to God, and times when he recedes. The Egyptians knew that all the mental processes going on in the mind of man are images on a small scale of the processes taking place on a grand scale in the universal mind, and that external phenomena are the shadows of internal realities. Being aware of the unity of all and knowing the nature of the spiritual forces in the macrocosm of nature and their correspondences in the microcosm of man, they studied the position of stars to know the time when humanity would again approach nearer to the divine Sun of Wisdom. They were able to tell the changes occurring in the spiritual condition of mankind by studying the position of the visible sun to the zodiac. But we are entering here upon forbidden ground. Even if we were able to expose the sacred mysteries of the ancient Egyptians to the scoffer and skeptic, it would be a sacrilege to attempt it. Moreover, these mysteries cannot be explained. They are beyond the intellectual conception of mortals. They can only be perceived intuitively by the spiritual intelligence of man after he has become self-conscious of the divinity of his God. And to speak to that is so true. You can grasp this stuff intellectually all day long, and I'm only speaking from my own process that I went through. This might not apply to everybody, but I think it's probably universal. And you can have that intellectual understand all the metaphors. It can make perfect sense to you. But that's only half the battle, because putting this stuff into action and truly understanding it is also part of it. And then even deeper than that, once there is a genuine intellectual understanding and a genuine want and need to apply this stuff to life, there's a feeling that also comes along with it. And that's the depth of this stuff. It's a feeling and a perception that cannot be explained, but one will definitely know it when it comes. It's indescribable, the types of understandings and the internal feeling of resonation and oneness that you feel when all this stuff really makes sense to you, and when you reflect on it and you just think in depth on it, and then you really get this realization that, wow, I am a part of this, and this is just so amazing that I'm even here, and that this can even be taking place, and that I'm a part of this, and can change things and can actually be involved in it. It's such an interesting insight and understanding to be able to feel that. And, for those who have done that and felt that and just know how much this stuff resonates, it's an indescribable feeling. And, but it has to be done through that feeling. Our bodies are like receivers. Our bodies are pure wisdom. But without educating our intellectual side, then we can't properly understand the things that we need to understand intellectually. That's kind of like preparation. It's very important to understand the in-depth details of all this stuff intellectually. And then comes the other parts of the enlightenment, right? And I don't think anybody can say they're fully enlightened. That would be like Jesus status or whatever, or Christ status. But this stuff goes in levels. So there are levels of enlightenment and insights that a person will gain when they are practicing this stuff. And when you get into the higher levels of it, it really is indescribable. Okay, where are we at? These sacred mysteries were in the possession of the Holy Brotherhood, and they were taught only to those select few who were fit to be instructed in them, or to express it more correctly, they were not taught at all, but the candidate was instructed how to act, so that his own spiritual powers of perception might be developed within him, and he became able to see and know such things himself. To be admitted within the sacred precincts of the Krata Ripoa, it was necessary not only to lead a blameless life, but to be in possession of extraordinary talents and strengths of character, and to devote one's life entirely to the practical application of the truths that were taught in this order. There were several degrees in that fraternity, and no one was admitted as a member of a higher degree until he had completed and mastered all that was to be acquired in the lower degrees, and which sometimes required many years to accomplish. An initiation in that order, or a passing to a higher degree, was a terribly serious matter, having nothing whatever in common with the sham initiations, mummeries, idle ceremonies, and ill-understood mysteries of modern secret societies. It was exceedingly difficult to be admitted as a candidate, and still more difficult to pass through the prescribed trials, which were rather of an internal than an external character. Many of those who did not succeed in standing the tests imposed upon them became insane. Others paid with their life the penalty for their daring, or had to remain prisoners in subterranean caves until death came to release them. Jehoshua applied for admission to one of the members, but was refused. He applied a second time to another member, but he was refused. But after he had applied for a third time, to his great joy, he was admitted as a candidate for probation, and he entered the temple at the day appointed for his preliminary instruction. And that's going to wrap up that chapter. I'm going to refrain from numbering that chapter because I can't remember, what was it, 3, 4? Anyway, I'll go back and check, but I had screwed that up in the beginning. But anyway, the next chapter will be the Mysterious Brotherhood, and we will get going on that as time permits. All right, thanks everyone. Like, subscribe, share with those who are seeking, if you so choose to, and we will talk again later. Take care now.